Ernest Hemingway knew that one of the best ways to become a writer was to go to war. And today we are going to hear Hemingway speak at length on not just the power of going to war, but the power of war as a subject for novels. Because when you look at the list of novels about war, Blood Meridian, War and Peace, Slaughterhouse-Five, The Things They Carried, I'm just thinking Catch-22, All Quiet on the Western Front, The Red Badge of Courage, Paths of Glory. I could just go on and on. Europe Central. It's a really big subject that gets focused on a ton, and it's very external because when you look at the other categories that are focused on in literary fiction a lot of the time, love and desire, death and mortality, stuff involving God and faith and the loss or the gaining of meaning. A lot of that is about these internal journeys. But war has this crazy external theater happening or circumstances, but then also you have the opportunity to look at the internal turbulence like Hemingway did a lot of the time in his Nick Adams series. And if you are new to the channel, Right Conscious talks about the best books and authors of all time. And of course, Hemingway is in that group. In the playlist down below, you will find videos on Hemingway's life, his books, and his philosophy. And so, enough for me, everyone. Let us now hear from Hemingway. Quote, I thought about Tolstoy and about what a great advantage and experience of war was to a writer. It was one of the major subjects and certainly one of the hardest to write truly of, and those writers who had not seen it were always very jealous and tried to make it seem unimportant or abnormal or a disease as a subject, while really it was just something quite irreplaceable that they had missed. And this is something, that famous line from Fight Club, we have no great war. And what's crazy is when you look at the writers who were in war, it is somewhat a disproportionate amount. We got Tolkien and Hemingway, Tim O'Brien, Tolstoy, Victor Hugo, Leo Tolstoy, Walt Whitman, Stephen Crane, Kurt Vonnegut, Norman Mailer, Anthony Burgess, and there were countless others, people like Yukio Mishima or Thomas Pynchon, who maybe served or were living, in Mishima's case, in a militaristic society, but didn't see combat, but wrote about war. Thomas Pynchon was in the military, understood war from a societal perspective and then a technical perspective like Pynchon. Hell, even Cormac McCarthy was in the military for 5 years, and he joined after World War II during a time where he probably could have been sent to combat. He almost got sent to Korea if that conflict would have kept going. So this is a big subject, but the first advantage that war gives a writer is discipline. I hate to say it. I know so many authors out there who have little to no discipline. And I understand that joining the military maybe in 2025 to get discipline isn't a great idea. But for many authors in the past who maybe didn't have this insane ambition, or they didn't have, Atomic Habits and millions of videos online about personal development and a jujitsu dojo on every corner of their city, it was a little bit harder to get into this stuff. And of course, with many of these people, war throughout time has been a necessity for all young men to take part of. And engaging in a disciplined art form, such as war and training your body, engaging in martial arts, fearing death, finding camaraderie with brothers, with people who you're willing to go all the way with. Those are all positive attributes, not just for writing on the page, but to hold steadfast to your principles later on as a human. I have a lot of friends who get pushed around by their spouse, and I'm not saying that men need to be these totalitarian, you have to listen to me, but they make 5% of the decisions and their wife makes 95% of them, and their lives and their souls are being ruined because of it. All of them are chill dudes who are just kind of pushovers. A lot of them smoke weed. They have no disciplined nature or strength within them to be able to push back. And I should say, I know people who are also in the military who are in the same situation. But to be a writer means you have to be disciplined. You have to be able to create boundaries and push people away. You have to be willing to not be scared and accept the consequences like Tolstoy was willing to do later in his life when he wanted to start uncopywriting his work and selling his entire estate. And his wife and kids are like, WTF, man, we're living here too. We don't want to be poor. And speaking of discipline, a couple months ago, I made a video where I talked about George R. R. Martin saying that he couldn't write and finish the Game of Thrones series because of fascism, because of Donald Trump, which is absolutely insane. Because even if you are the most, or I should say, the biggest Donald Trump hater in the world, George R. R. Martin in his multi-million-dollar house in New Mexico is at no risk of anything, because there are authors like J.R.R. Tolkien who wrote through World War II, through the bombing of London. That dude wrote the Lord of the Rings series. He had to deal with real fascism. And so actually going through hard experiences makes it easier for you to reject kind of the fantasies that are really easy to create in our mind, the excuses that we come up with. And so there is a big advantage before you even step onto the battlefield. Just going to basic training and going through the motions gives you this advantage. And before we hop into the next section, I want to talk to you guys about the Right Conscious Book Club, because we are the most active book club online right now. We read anywhere from 6 to 10 transformative novels a month, and we are currently reading through Ernest Hemingway's bibliography. So over the next year or so, if you are seeing this, you can join my Ernest Hemingway book club and course and get access to all my other courses, live streams, content over on Substack. I also have a bunch of free content over on Substack, and all the book clubs are recorded so you can watch them all back. We covered over the past year probably over 50 books already, so you can always catch up and ask me questions. My goal with the book club and with the courses is to, yes, help you get a deeper understanding, but also help activate you so you feel motivated to read all the best works in the world, so you can get through Hemingway's entire bibliography. And doing it with a group and having content to reinforce that, and even speaking about it with others if you're interested in that, is one of the best ways to learn anything. That's how people did it all throughout the past. People read something at home and came together and discussed it and grew from that. And so I will put the link down in the description below if you guys would like to join the Hemingway book club and course. I just posted a video on Hemingway, I think yesterday, over there, that is only for members, and I will see you guys over there. But of course, when you get on the battlefield, if you are in a combat position or even in a non-combat position, you are an epicenter of trauma. Trauma is crystallizing within you. And obviously, that is a negative for your life, for your own mental health. You know, how many veterans kill themselves every year? A very alarming number. But it sucks to say, but it's kind of good for art. If you look at Ernest Becker and Otto Rank, the psychoanalytical thinkers, Rank's book, Art and the Artist, the creative urge and personality development, I'll link it down below. He talks about that, talks about how the root of all art is trauma. And I want to say, before everyone runs and goes and becomes an artiste manqué and starts, engraving the cross on their forehead, that we have a new framework in our reality, in my opinion. I think because of the proliferation of knowledge and the rise of leisure and many other things, that many of us can transmute creativity from a place of positivity instead of this old dark well of terror and tragedy and life being hard. And you still can do that. But I think if you take religion seriously, or mindfulness seriously, spirituality, whatever path you want to take seriously, if you can connect to transcendent things, if you can slow down your life, if you have a lot of leisure time, if you start to love yourself more and take care of yourself more and love others more, that eventually you can start to draw from other places. That's at least what I've found. And I know countless other people who have a very similar experience. And we're kind of the visionaries of that new and the greenhorns of this new type of creativity, because all throughout time, people were living in tragedy. Many of the authors who didn't even go to war had kids that, died early, wives that died early. They died early. They were living in harsh times without running water and AC or a heater, through wars, through revolutions, in Siberian camps, a million different things. Most of us don't have to experience that. We only have to experience the terror of our own soul while being alone. But nonetheless, I wanted to bring this up because over the past couple decades, we've been in the war on terror. And even though we're not currently fighting a conflict, we have soldiers in the Middle East, and we are one incident away from being right back in it. And the War on Terror, for the first time in history, gave a major Western country an opportunity to have its class of soldiers before, during, and after the war to have to share their voice on scalable digital media platforms, their voice or even their art. And I've read a lot of modern books on war. I had a professor at the university I went to, UNLV, David Morris, and I also had a Vietnam veteran as an English professor, Lee Barnes. And I took classes on war, and we read these modern books about war. And maybe I haven't read the right ones, and I think that Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried is an exception here. But I don't feel like, as a collective, and this could be said about almost every single micro genre of literature, that we've stood on the shoulders and taken our predecessors, dating from the 1980s or 1970s back. I don't think we've taken their work to the next level. I don't think we've gotten there. And when we have, it's with authors like William T. Vollmann in his novel Europe Central, which in my opinion is the best World War II novel ever written, better than Gravity's Rainbow and others, which is a big statement, but he wasn't a veteran. And it also brings up a good point that William T. Vollmann, much like Cormac McCarthy, who wrote a great novel about war in Blood Meridian, that to think about war now isn't about the terror of war. We all know that. We've all seen, or maybe I hope you've seen, the Russian war movie, probably the best World War II movie, Come and See, or just the hundreds of war movies. We all understand the terror and the problems with romanticizing war. But now that we have some distance from the world wars, especially World War II, we can start to write about them in an artistic way that is pushing the limits. And this has kind of been one of these big things. I remember Dan Carlin saying a long time ago that nobody gets scared. No one cares if you talk about Genghis Khan, but he was as bad as any of the modern dictators in the 20th century. He killed so many different people. But if you have a odd theory or a theory that Genghis Khan was a good thing because he brought together East and West, nobody cares. But if you have a alternative opinion on Hitler or Stalin or Mussolini or whoever, then you have to get canceled because we are too close in proximity to that war. And there are people who were in it that are still alive, and many children of those people who are still alive and have been programmed. But what's funny is that we had this huge world war, 2 of them. And then we had this big boom in technology, which was kind of created by it, and we've globalized. And now we have this rise of digital technology and the saturation of art to this level of hyper reality and the raising of so many different people because of the internet and just because of global education endeavors into literacy, that for the first time ever, people don't care, and people will look at those conflicts and can write about them or speak about them or make art about them in whatever medium, and are doing things that would have got them killed all throughout history if they were that close in proximity. Because of our freedom of speech and all this stuff, we can do that. And that's what I feel like Europe Central does, and I think that's why it won the National Book Award. It isn't some pro-Nazi book or like something crazy like that, but it puts heart and absurdity and so many different things that the authors who I think that were in the war couldn't see yet. And when they did, Slaughterhouse-Five, not to cut myself off, has heart and soul to it. It has variation and contrast and irony and black humor and all these different things, and it's good. And it captures it. And Vonnegut's really pushing this message across. But something like Europe Central gets that done, but it has a maximalist attitude to it. It doesn't have to limit itself. It doesn't have to be simple. It doesn't have to be so it goes. And the reason I'm mentioning this is that I don't think that someone like a William T. Vollmann, a David Foster Wallace, think of these authors that have a very high intellect, very high talent. David Foster Wallace went to Amherst, or whatever you say, a very good university. William T. Vollmann went to Ivy League schools, went to Deep Springs College, the best universities in the country, and said, I'm going to be a writer. These are high IQ individuals. And because we don't have drafts anymore, because there isn't this necessity to join the military, I'm an English teacher. I have been for, 6 to 8 years. The number's not ringing in my head right now. I've known hundreds of students who've joined the military. I have not ever seen one of my more intellectually superior, not to say that, but my most intelligent students, my most heart-oriented students, or my most artistic students. I've never seen any of those students in that top 5% ever go to the military. And until a draft comes back, I think that less and less of those students are going to continue to join. They're going to see that, risking your life or going over into some dump, serving the US military, which for decades has just been the military industrial complex, stoking wars. Which is funny that there's finally a convergence, Many conservatives now are taking a more anti-war approach, and obviously liberals have been, doing that forever. I don't think anybody wants to be involved. And so it would be interesting to see someone with a William T. Vollmann's perspective, a Thomas Pynchon, someone like that, confront 9/11, which I know Pynchon doesn't like Bleeding Edge, but he's old now. Someone who's young, someone who's talented, high IQ, traumatized, confront something like the absurdity of the war on terror, the invasion of Iraq, and turn it into a war and peace, an infinite jest. Just hearing myself say that right now, I feel like that could be like something that all of us could rally behind. That's something that could go big and like go mainstream, something literary that would blow everyone away. And so that's just a quick explication on the first part of the quote. Hemingway also mentions, and we have more quotes in a second, that many other writers tried to demonize war and make it seem unimportant, abnormal, or a disease. But what Hemingway couldn't foresee is that he wrote this before the Second World War, I should say. And I think he looked around at many of his modernist compatriots and was like, these guys are a bunch of pussies, especially the ones who weren't talking about war. But what I think of when I hear him say this, and I think this happened, is that many of the people who were in World War II, let's say they were 20 years old, 20 years later when they were at their artistic peak in their 40s, I'm thinking of Robert Bly right here, the best anti-war poet, I think, ever. His anti-war poetry book, The Light Around the Body, which won the National Book Award, is one of the best pieces of writing I've ever read. The Teeth Mother Naked at Last. But he saw combat in World War II, but then realized later on or I should say the nature of the military industrial complex, and then got to write about it. But he was one of these talented individuals. And so now I feel like it's going to be very hard for most of us to be able to write about war well because of how polarized things have become. Because on one side, let's say you went to war and you served in the war on terror. Well, the problem is that if you are going to defend it, then you are keeping the truth blinders on. And that's not going to be a work that is necessarily transformative or groundbreaking. We've kind of seen that done before. But if you if you had your experience soured or something really bad happened to you, and you're like, this was all for nothing, I also feel like that resentment is also going to be a block to creativity. And so it seems like the only solution is this high IQ individual who did serve, who did see things, who did believe, and then slowly over time expanded their field of vision, but kept it expanding, not going inward, not falling into negative spirals of beings. I'm like imagining like a Walt Whitman type novelist with an air of Pynchonian occultism and pessimism in there. That seems like a reasonable solution. And so enough on that. Let us now hop into our next quote. Like me to write you a little essay on the importance of subject? Well, the reason you are so sore you missed the war is because war is the best subject of all. It groups the maximum of material and speeds up the action and brings out all sorts of stuff that normally you have to wait a lifetime to get. What made Three Soldiers a swell book was the war. What made Streets of Night a lousy book was Boston. One was as well written as the other. I can hear you telling me I'm all wrong. Maybe I am. Love is also a good subject you might be said to have discovered. Other major subjects are the money from which we get riches and poors, also avarice. Gentlemen, the boy lecturer is tired. A dull subject, I should say, would be impotence. Murder is a good one, so we get a swell murder into your next book and sit back. And that was a letter to F. Scott Fitzgerald in 1925. And so that's just further reinforcing the point that war speeds things up, that sometimes the emotional states that you would have to wait for, the longing, I'm thinking of Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried right now. The lieutenant, I forget his name, longing for Martha, whatever her name is, the girl who's writing him the letters. That longing, if he was just away at college and she was in Vermont and he was in California, it wouldn't be as strong. But the fear of death, the VC, that is what's driving these emotions out. Same thing with death. I've talked about before that Kausho Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, which is an absolute masterpiece, deserved to get a Nobel Prize, one of few. What he wanted to do with that novel is make us confront kind of the bleakness of our life in a faster way. The novel, without spoiling it, this is on the back cover, is about a group of clones who have their organs harvested in their early 20s when they're kind of fully formed. And so he said, in our modern world, most of our stories deal with death of people who are in their 80s and 90s, or people who are sick and slowly dying of cancer, or war novels. But he said, what would happen if we took happy kids, people who have lived a normal life, but then they have to, die, make a donation? It's a really good topic, really good to think about. But what it does is speed things up. And that's something I don't hear very much. People like Book Fox and all the other things, like 3 things your plot needs, is about pace and like speeding things up and slowing things down. And like those are the core things in a story. Those are kind of the hidden treasures that real authors do in coming of age stories and tragedies. Like many of the best are built on that, speeding up the growth of someone to a place that shouldn't be. Or if you've read the science fiction classic Hyperion, what if you flip that? Anyway, thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for the support. I want to know your thoughts about war. 95% of the people listening to this right now, if you're listening, you are a man. You have your opinions on war. I would like to see them. I read every single comment. I don't have time to respond to them anymore because that would be a full-time job in and of itself. But I would love to see them. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? I would love to see you guys in the Ernest Hemingway Book Club. And I will see you guys all very soon in the next video.